Well, for our top news story, it seems that we're on schedule for what MIT predicted back in 1972. That a prediction that society will collapse this century. In technology, enabling the imagination of artificial intelligence. Could this unleash AI from its limits? In materials, the scientists have created the world's thinnest magnet. Why is that important? And in physics, can consciousness be explained by quantum physics? Research apparently is closer to finding out. In environment, China steps up the climate fight with emissions trading scheme, but it still lags in its efforts by so much. In biology, there are fibers that are microbially produced that are stronger than steel and amazingly tough. In humans and us, what's this about massive industrial decline and gentrification? The political elephants in the room? Tell us about that. And then in health, think about this. Keeping your brain active may delay Alzheimer's dementia for 5 years. So that's what we'll talk about today. And Richard, what's this in our top story that we're on schedule for what MIT predicted back in 1972, that society will collapse this century?
Well, it's kind of a problem.
Nice.
Yeah.
I recognize Fred Harland's voice.
So anyway, a new study now by a director of one of the world's largest accounting firms, KPMG, has confirmed that now a study that's almost 50 years old from MIT warning about the risk of industrial civilization collapsing. The study seems to be accurate based on new empirical data. So they did it 50 years ago, and they kind of reconfirmed with current data. And the research raises urgent questions about the risk of attempting to simply return to the pre-pandemic normal. In 1972, a team of MIT scientists got together to study the risk of civilization collapse. And they used a systems dynamic model and identified impending limits to growth. And this, using the model, it meant that industrial civilization was on track to collapse sometimes in the 21st century due to, wait for this, over-exploitation of planetary resources. And so at the time, this MIT analysis was widely derided by pundits, but now it looks like it has received a stunning verification. The KPMG study, which is on their website, concludes that current business as usual trajectory of global civilization is headed towards the terminal decline of economic growth within the coming decade. Within the coming decade. And at worst, could trigger societal collapse by around 2040. There's some voice on there. Can you turn your speaker off, please? I think it's you, John. It might be.
I don't think so.
somebody's wife is talking.
How do they know that
It was
Everyone should mute their speaker. except
anyway,
if they're
maybe it
talking.
would go away. If you're not talking, just mute it. Anyway, the person who did it as research to her master's thesis, and she said she was curious to see which scenarios in the study were aligning most closely with empirical data today. And what she found, let me show you some of the studies. Except it looks like I'm not ready to show you this because I don't. Oh, here it is. Okay. She looked at this and formed several different models. This is the business as usual model. And if you notice with this business as usual model, here is pollution. And pollution just continues to rise and go off the top of the chart about 2060. And so it shows population here continuing to rise until about 2040, and then pretty much dropping like a rock for the rest of the century. They also show resources in a pretty significant drop, and they show industrial output peaking at about 2040 and then dropping like a rock. And they show food then increasing nicely, and then about 2025 or so starting to drop real drastically. So this is what we get by business as usual, and you can see why they describe that as a collapse. It doesn't mean humanity will cease to exist, but that economic and industrial growth will stop, then decline, which will hurt food production and standards of living. The next model they had was comprehensive technology model. And this is where you're doing things about the problem and bringing new technologies online. And if you look here, then here is global warming somewhere. I don't see, oh, there's pollution here. You see pollution climbing, peaking about 2050 and then going down. This is kind of like the world program we have now, which is, kind of zero emissions by 2050. And so this is what they forecast in 1972. It showed population going up, that's the blue line, and then leveling out. They see industrial production going up and then coming down some, but not collapsing. They see food going up, having a little dip, but then recovering. And so this is kind of, in my mind, like the soft landing scenario they have talked about. Then they also showed another model, which was the stabilized world growth, SW. And this is what would happen if we start actually doing a sustainable path and then have a widespread investment in things like public health and education. So this is what would happen if civilizations around the world started to take care of the planet and take care of each other. This is the model that shows the least decline, the least disaster, etc. And so they had these three different models. When the woman compared these models with the present situation, what she found was that either one of the first two models could be on the path we're on. We don't know yet, and we won't know yet for another few years. The nicest model, the stabilized world model, she says, if you look at the numbers, we're not tracking with that at all. And so here we have a forecast that actually looks fairly good, that was made 50 years ago, that looks like it's still the case. And this forecast now, the best available data with this forecast really suggests that what we decide to do and actually do over the next 10 years, repeat, over the next 10 years, determines the long-term fate of civilization. So this says that whatever we're going to do, we have to actually do it to avoid the collapse of civilization. Now, they further say they have ideas for optimism. There are a lot of things that are going on that are good, which includes more civic involvement and more companies and governments getting behind it. And if those things actually go the right way, we have time to get a good solution, and it's not too late to create a truly sustainable civilization that works for everybody. All we have to do is decide that it's a critical problem and actually do something about it like it is a critical problem. So what do you guys think?
I think that I wonder 50 years ago if the talk about climate change was as widespread as it is now, because I think within a few years, we're already seeing the effect of climate change in the fires in the West and also in the flooding in Europe. And I just wonder 5 years from now, very soon, this might get much worse. So will that model done 50 years ago still hold fairly much true?
Well, 5 years is less than 10 years, and they say we have to do something in the next 10 years to change the way we're living.
The thing is that Club of Rome study was very simplistic with simple inputs and simple algorithms. And it was debunked at the time. I recall they were talking about us running out of copper and running out of platinum and running out of all these stuff in the 1990s, and it never happened. And this forecasting with simplistic models is it's just eyewash. It has no basis in
to
fact.
me, one of the things, what you're saying could well be true, and to be able to do it, I bet they had to simplify the shit out of it. However, having something that tracks over 50 years with what is still the same simplistic model gives it credibility in my eyes. It's not like they predicted anything that is not happening.
Well, they did predict a lot of stuff that has not happened. So lots of what they predicted didn't happen. So, it's cherry picking to only select the models that came true. It's like Nostradamus and his prognostications.
You don't know. You don't know. Did you review to the study? Do you know the data they use? Are you saying this based on careful analysis of it, or are you saying this because that's kind of what fits with your ideas about things?
Probably a little of both, but I did buy the book when it came out in
Okay, that's
in
good.
the 1980s, and I read it, and I recall particularly the business of running out of all of these so-called critical industrial
Sure.
metals like copper and platinum and
Sure.
whatever.
And
that
I've
never
also, I know other people who have expressed that same argument to me. And, I have trouble accepting that argument for a variety of reasons. But anyway, as I say, the fact that reviewing the numbers 50 years later and the number still fits gives it a lot more validity in my mind. I've dealt with forecast systems pretty much my professional life since I was in my 20s, for business and things like this. And so because of that, I have a little sensitivity.
Well, Al Gore had a lot better models for climate change. And in 2009, he said that the North Pole would be ice-free by 2014. And we all know that didn't happen.
That's right. He missed it by at least 5 or 10 years.
So my concern is that my understanding is that the researcher based her study on the original data and
Right.
affirmed that the original trajectory was correct, and has come to the same conclusion that something has to be done to avoid this. But does she specify what has to be done?
She talks about it some, but she doesn't go through and do the details here. My impression is she was running the numbers and seeing if you come out, and then after she ran the numbers, then she was saying we have 10 years to change things or we're stuck. And by this, she would say stuck in the probability that is the worst case probability becomes more of the actual probability. So now, right now, she said we could be on either the worst model or the intermediate model. And
so the basic thing is that, this is a conversation starter in that it's posted up on the KPMG site and people can look at this and it could start a conversation about what exactly we need to do to avoid the.
Right, that's what I hope.
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty good place for it to be, but it needs to go even further. Yeah. But of course, it's been here now, so that's good.
KPMG was careful to say they do not support or subscribe to this opinion. It was the independent work of one of their employees.
Right. It's not a KPMG work product. And they're clear about that.
Well, personally, I think everything's going to hell anyway. So I kind of agree with all this stuff, but I just don't agree that models are good predictors of the future.
Yeah.
Well, predicting the future, one of the things I've learned about studying forecasts for 50 years is the problem with predicting the future is that it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
If only we could reduce population, all the other things that they're tracking would improve. If we focused our attention on that, instead of all the other things individually, I think we'd get there. We'd get to the.
Well, I think you're Right, Clive. And I think the people we should focus on are the people who are these old people who are not contributing anymore to the society. I think they have a lot of protein locked up in their system, and we ought to recover it for our civilization. I think that's such a good idea. Well, the thing I want to say, though, Clive, is you first.
Yeah. The trouble is
It's all
that
as we're all useless feeders, eh?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
well, the problem is that 50% of the children that are born, all their parents really wanted was to have sex.
I think that's been going on for a while.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, if we want to move on, what's this about in technology, the imagination of artificial intelligence?
Now, I think this is a real big deal, actually. And to give you an idea of what we're talking about, imagine an orange cat. Now, imagine the same cat, but with black fur. Now, imagine that cat strutting down the street in a heique. Okay. Doing this, then your neuron activates things quickly in your brain that deals with those variations of the picture based on what you know about the world already. This actually, something I think is highly related to this, was really instrumental in the development of contemporary humans. About 70,000 years ago, in human languages, there developed something that is called prefrontal synthesis. And this is where you compare different things in the front of your mind. Then if you're comparing these things, then you can start to try different combinations. And in this trying different combinations, you get new ideas. This is one of the ways that new ideas happen. And there was a linguistic variation that happened about 70,000 years ago that started to train people how to do this. And then that variation, if you look at human culture, again, about 70,000 years ago, there was a big explosion in culture, and it showed up in things like the stone points that they're making. I'm sure it showed up in other places that don't leave relics. And so, as humans, it's easy to envision an object with different attributes, but this is not so easy for these computers to do it. For computers, the skill of imagination just isn't there. And so at USC, the researchers developed an AI system that started to show human-like capabilities, where they could start to demonstrate imagination in a computer. And, you know, humans can separate these different attributes of an object and then recombine them to imagine a new things. But computers haven't been able to do that. And if you look at the way they're trained on sample data that are looking at details like pixels in a picture rather than taking into account the whole object and the object's attributes. And so what the researchers did to overcome that limitation is they used a concept called disentanglement. And disentanglement can be used to separate out the different attributes of something, disentangling them with that thing. And so, for example, right now, they can use it to generate deep fakes by disentangling human face movements and identity from the picture and then synthesize new images that substitute the person's identity, put a new person in the picture. This approach takes a group of sample images rather than one sample, and then mines the data of the group for similarities between them and achieves something called quote, controllable disentangled representation learning. And they're able to use that to achieve controllable novel image synthesis, or what you might call imagination. Again, as another example, in the Transformer movie, this system can take the shape of a Megatron car, the color of the yellow Bumblebee car in the background of New York Times Square, and combine them all in an image where you have a yellow Bumblebee colored magnetron car driving in Times Square, even if that sample was not witnessed during the training session. And this is similar how we humans extrapolate. Things like this could be useful in the field of medicine, for example, to discover more useful drugs by disentangling the medicine function from other properties and then recombining them and maybe coming up with a new molecule. This also could allow autonomous vehicles then to be able to imagine and avoid dangerous scenarios that were unseen during training. And so this new disentanglement approach, they say, for the first time unleashes a new kind of imagination that is possible in AI systems, and it brings them closer to humans. And I think this may be the key step to what is called the singularity, which is the time where this artificial intelligence becomes so powerful that we cannot stop it or control it anymore.
Did the Club of Rome have anything to say about the singularity and when we could expect that?
I haven't seen anything on that in a while. The last I read, it was 10 or 20 years away, not far.
In this same vein, there's all kinds of scientific papers published, and they have abstracts for them with key words. And in the metallurgy world, they were curious about the thousands and thousands of papers were far beyond anything that any one researcher could look at and understand. So they got the computers looking at these abstracts for the key words, and they made, about 10 years ago, they made a kind of an algorithm that would look at key words and predict what areas of metallurgical research should be done in the future. So they had the thing look at all the abstracts that were done in the 1990s to see what the computer algorithm would foresee as developments in the 2010 time frame. And it was amazing that the computer was able to predict what areas of metallurgical research would have the most promise. So that, so now they've turned it over, looking at abstracts from the 2000 to 2020 with the same idea. And this enables them to run all manner of computer simulations of different ideas. And like you say, it offers tremendous opportunities for discovering new things.
And when the computer, to me, one view that I have of the singularity is that's when the computer doing research like you're talking about is able to make its own research decisions and plan what to do next. And there are, I read some about those kind of systems that actually are emerging.
Yeah, and equally, the computer diagnostics and computer legal arbitration and things like that will be able to do it without the biases that humanity puts in all our thinking and decision.
Except they still have, it depends on the training data they get it, whether it has the biases or not, because a lot of the biases for this stuff shows up in the training data.
I suppose, and
So
even
it's
our histories are biased. Yeah.
right. Anyway, so it's not an easy problem. But again, having computers have imagination and to be able to use that imagination to have new ideas is, I think, an enormously big thing in the development of computer systems.
I just wonder with artificial intelligence, when it gets smarter and smarter, whether it will take into account compassion and the cultural values that some of us have, or is just a cold scientific evaluation of what's best?
Well, again, for now, it depends on how you train it. If you train it on the Reddit data set, then it's going to be hostile and aggressive. If you train it by having it read the great books, then it'll be different.
Well, it's also who trains it, right?
Well, that's another part of the problem. Again, in some of the areas like the supercomputer that plays Go, the earliest version of it that beat the world's best player, they trained it. A year later, the next version of that same computer trained itself. So anyway.
So, Richard, moving on to materials, what's this about the world's thinnest magnet?
Well, this is 2D comes to magnets, or magnets come to 2D. They have been working for a long time trying to figure out some way to make an ultra thin magnet that operates at room temperature. And if they can do this, they think it will have many applications in computing and electronics, such as higher density memory devices. They also think that it will be a key element to the coming spintronic memory devices, where they are encoding the memory on the spin of an electron, and that it will help quantum physics. And so this is a big deal for them. And now the guys at Berkeley Lab and UC Berkeley have made the first room temp 2D magnet. And now today's memory devices are typically made from magnetic thin films. They call them thin, but these are real, still three-dimensional items that are hundreds or thousands of atoms thick. And if you can make one that's 1 atom thick, that means that things like disk drives can store data at a much higher density. These kind of magnets also give a new opportunity for studying quantum physics, because now to actually study it at the particle level is difficult, because conventional magnetic materials, most of the magnetic atoms are deeply buried inside the magnet, so it's hard to get to them to study it. And so this particular one now is synthesized in a way that actually is pretty easy. It's a solution of graphene oxide, zinc, and cobalt, and it's baked for a few hours, and then that baking transforms it into a single atomic layer of zinc oxide with some cobalt atoms sandwiched between layers of graphene. When they're through with that, they do a final step, which is to burn away the graphene, so you have a single layer of cobalt doped zinc oxide. And so this is a process that can be scaled up easily for industry to make these things. And these 2D magnets may be one of the things that brings about the next big step in electronics and technology.
Any thoughts?
I'm thinking about the old core memories from years ago, which would retain the data without any outside stimulus.
Right.
Would this be something similar?
Oh, this does that also, and they understand the physics of it doing that, and so it retains it even with the power off. So that's called non-volatile memory.
Well, Richard, moving on a little bit, you made reference to quantum physics. And the question is, can consciousness be explained by quantum physics? What's this research that's trying to figure that out?
Now, the first part of it, the introduction to this, is that nobody knows what consciousness is at the level of physics or anything else. They can see kind of what consciousness does, but nobody knows what it is. Some people like me have the crazy idea that consciousness is just a part of the universe. But here, the physicists and scientists have been for a long time trying to figure out what consciousness is, and to be able to attach something to the brain to be able to find the consciousness. And in the 1990s, which now when you think about it, that's a long time ago, that's 20 and 30 years ago, there's a physicist, Roger Penrose, who has teamed up with an anesthesiologist, Stuart Hameroff, to propose an answer to consciousness. And they claim that the brain's neuronal system forms an intricate network, and that consciousness is produced by this network, and it should follow the laws of quantum physics. And this explains the mysterious complexity of human consciousness. Now, the quantum guys at the time really dismissed this idea, because quantum effects that they know about are only found at very low temperatures. For example, you've heard of these quantum computers. These things operate at below minus 270 degree F, which is very cold, because at higher temperatures, classical mechanics takes over from the quantum mechanics. And since our body works at room temperature, you would expect it then to be governed by the classical law of physics. So on this basis, this quantum consciousness theory has been just dismissed outright. And now, more recently, these researchers have investigated how quantum particles could move in complex structures like the brain. And of course, our brains are composed of neurons, and it is believed that their combined activity generates consciousness somehow. You get enough of them together and it makes this thing that didn't have consciousness suddenly springs out and there's consciousness. Oh boy. And now each neuron contains tubular tubies, and these theory now of quantum consciousness argues that these microtubules are structured in a fractal pattern that would enable quantum processes to occur. And fractals, we know them as beautiful patterns that repeat themselves infinitely, and they generate what is seemingly impossible, a structure that has a finite limited area but an infinite perimeter. How can something have a finite area and an infinite perimeter? Anyway, those are what fractals are like. And they are made up of the same basic shape, repeating itself over and over at smaller and smaller scales. This happens in nature all the time. And inside your own body, the structure of your lungs is fractal, and the blood vessels in your body, the circulatory system is fractal. And so fractals have been used to explain the complexity of human consciousness because they are infinitely intricate. So that's, kind of, you'd want something that's, if you don't know what it is, you want something that's got a lot of capability. Fractals have this, and that's why they have this theory of quantum consciousness. Now, we can't measure quantum fractals in the brain because I don't think we want to freeze the brain to 270 degrees below zero. It wouldn't work very well there. But they have figured out how to arrange electrons in a fractal pattern. And with this, they have created quantum fractals, and they measure the wave function of the electrons, and they too, the wave patterns are different than what you would see with conventional physics and the waveforms of the electrons. And they have seen that quantum fractals actually behave in different ways to classical ones. They found that the spread of light across a fractal is governed by different laws in the quantum case compared to the classical case. But they see something is going on there. And it's an interesting area of research. And they hope to find consciousness somewhere and to be able to know what it is. And we'll find out. Tune in, and maybe next week we'll be able to tell you.
I think brain neurons are very much larger than atomic particles. So I
That's
don't know
right.
what the number is. Is it a couple of thousand atoms across, or is it a couple of million atoms across?
I don't know. I think it's probably closer to a couple of million, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
Because they do equate consciousness to the idea of empathy. And they've been able to measure the neural activity in monkeys. And if one monkey sees another monkey reaching for a banana or something like that, the same neurons in the observer monkey are triggered that would be triggered if he himself reached for that banana. So they think that that ability of the observer monkey to kind of conceptualize what the other monkey is actually doing is part of this idea of consciousness and awareness of what other animals or other things are thinking about.
Now, I think of consciousness as that which lights up the brain.
Well,
You know, I know stuff because of first, you know, my brain like has gotten sense signals from my eyes and transformed those signals into some kind of mental image, and somehow consciousness is that which knows that mental image.
yeah, because 99% of what your brain is doing, you are unaware of.
Right. But you're still aware of that mental image. It still takes a directing of attention. And
Yeah.
so you have one element, which is consciousness, which is just there. And then you have the mental attention, which is aiming your mind and sense organs in some particular way to put something into consciousness, but consciousness is just there.
Well, it's that part of your brain that is doing that imaging that artificial intelligence article was about.
Right.
Yeah. And it receives signals from the unconscious part of your brain that helps it put all this imagery together.
Well, Richard, what's this about China having an emissions trading scheme, but still not doing very much?
Well, this story is either a good story or a not so good story, depending upon your viewpoint. The good part of it is China has launched its long awaited emissions trading system recently, a few weeks ago. And to say it's long awaited, China has been talking about this for a decade. And what took them so long is their things like the coal lobby in China has enormous money and power. And there in China is the fear of taking care of our climate means we may have to ramp down our economy. So that's why it's taken them so long to do it. And this is now, they say, is a key tool in their quest to become climate neutral by 2060. The rest of the world is saying 2050. And China is, their plan is to go slower than is needed by the world. And this plan was launched by China to show their leadership in the world. And the plan forces thousands of Chinese companies to cut their pollution or face deep penalties. And there are questions that remain about it. The biggest question, I think, is the low price that they have paid on pollution. In Europe, the cost per ton in the European emissions trading system is about $50 a ton. In China, the expected price for the first year is going to be out about $4.60 a ton. So it's going to be about a tenth of the European system. But still, it's going to cover a seventh of the global carbon emissions that are burning fossil fuels. And if it costs them more to do it, then at least some of the people are going to find ways to operate without using as much carbon. And the scheme was initially supposed to be a lot bigger. It was scaled back because of fears of impacting the economy. And in fact, this pandemic has made the actual situation worse because China has fallen behind in its economy over this pandemic period, and they're looking to boost the growth after the pandemic. And anything rules to limit emission will disrupt this growth model. So China is doing something, but it looks like the steps they're taking are too small, and they still are limiting the steps based on fear of economic harm.
Yeah, it's just eyewash. It enables them to say they're doing something about it, but it doesn't punish them enough to really hurt their expansion and their growth.
That's what it seems like.
Biology. What are these about fibers that are microbially produced and are really strong and tough?
It's another one of the kind of developments in one of this century's hot areas, which is biology and synthetic biology particularly. And so spider silk is one of the strongest, toughest materials on Earth. And engineers at Washington University in St. Louis have designed amyloid silk hybrid proteins and had them produced by engineered bacteria, and the resulting fibers are stronger and tougher than natural spider silks. And this artificial silk called polymeric amyloid fiber, of course, was produced by bacteria, not the scientists. The scientists genetically engineered these bacteria to produce it. And before, a few years ago in 2018, at the same lab, they produced bacteria that used recombinant spider silk and had performance that was equivalent to spider silk. And then they wondered if they could make something better than spider silk with their synthetic biology platform. And so they modified the amino acid sequences of spider silk protein to produce new properties. And this latest is a production of a hybrid polymer amyloid protein with 128 repeating units. The longer this protein is, the stronger and tougher is the resulting fiber. And this fiber is stronger than steel and tougher than Kevlar. And further, the lab says that these new proteins and the resulting fibers are not the end of the story for high performance synthetic fibers, but in this lab, they're just getting started.
Mm.
Comment on that?
One of the
Go ahead.
Sorry, the interesting thing is they say that the key to it was introducing these nano crystals made with amyloid fibers. But they don't say where they got these amyloid fibers, but I suspect they're getting them from Alzheimer's patients, because we all know that
They got a lot of
amyloid
extra
plaques.
ones.
Yeah, so maybe it's going to be a win-win for everyone. You get Alzheimer's, you can make a spider
Oh,
silk.
that's right. So stick your brain in the spider silk machine and
Yeah, so
they
great.
can harvest the amyloids and then make spider silk. Okay. That's recycling for you. Okay, let's go on.
Industrial decline and gentrification and a political elephant? What are you talking about?
Well, the dramatic decline in industrial and blue collar union jobs has largely been ignored, and new jobs in the tech and white collar areas have replaced a lot of these. But these jobs are only available to people with appropriate skills, and these skills and white collar and tech jobs means that these people can afford the skyrocketing rents that are show up now in many of these big cities. New York is a prime example of this process, where gentrification began in the 60s and now has proceeded to the place where most people or many people can't afford to live in New York. That's a regular part of the story. And trends in capitalism, technology advances, and the importing of industrial materials and products have really lowered these union jobs, because the unions can't compete with the costs. And then when the labor is too expensive, now the manufacturing process is moved outside to another country. And many of our cities used to be industrial hubs, and now they're turned into gentrified white collar cities for these people with the training and education and the skills, and who can afford the high rents, the cost of housing, and higher priced living accessories. The author here argues is that these people that are affected this way are a reason why Trump got so many votes, is these are people who are displaced by the modern way of life and see that instead of moving up in the world, they and their children have less than they used to. And so I can see that that would cause a lot of real issues. And then this deindustrialization and gentrification, the writer argues, have been embraced by both parties at the leadership level for a long time. They have not been paying attention to job creation for the victims of this. And rather have featured things like mass incarceration of poor and working class people of color, like the war on drugs that increased the number of people in prisons in America by about a factor of 5. And we don't have to worry about getting them jobs if they're in jail. And so the economic consequences of deindustrialization have been pretty drastic in the country. Republicans even go further because the Republicans blame poverty on the poor themselves. So they kind of ignore the issues that are behind it. And, you don't want to give too much welfare because it just makes somebody weak and dependent on the government. Another area that contributes to this is the military budget. The military budget gets the big money from the taxpayers who have to pay the bill. And this military spending makes very few people rich and a lot more poor. And it's just another contributing issue. And the writer says that he's concerned that in trying to please both Wall Street and the millions of ordinary Americans, something's got to give, something has to change. And anyway, I appreciate the argument that he makes is that this deindustrialization is one of the things that is at the root of the changes that we see in America and some of the political tensions that we see as well. What do you
Any
think?
thoughts?
Well, hasn't that been true for a long time? That new technologies displaces people with less skills and new people take their spot. There's less there's less jobs of non-skilled people,
Right.
less and less and less.
And people, there is a real demand for employees with high skill levels. So much so that, some of them, like my son, who's a real high level computer network guy, after he reviewed resumes when they were looking for new people to hire, he found his skills were so good that he could get a new job in about 20 minutes. He
That
has
was
the
also
skills.
true in the mid-60s. American companies, a lot of them went to Europe to hire engineers, and all of a sudden getting a green card was very, very easy if you had an engineering degree.
Right.
That's how I got over here in 1966.
Okay. And certainly I would say in the semiconductor industry in the 70s, and the semiconductor industry was massively moving labor intensive processes into Asia.
Yeah. So it's only the G7 countries that are suffering from losing industrial jobs. I think, they're all going to Asia and to countries in the G20 who are not part of the G7.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it a self-correcting problem in the long term? It's just that you can be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Well, depending on what you mean by the long term, they say, climate disasters cure themselves in the long term. The other mass extinctions we've had, they say on the average, they fix themselves after only 20 million years.
Yeah, the only reason we're here is previous climate change that
That's right.
destroyed these other species.
That's right.
This deindustrialization is also the loss of manufacturing component of the
Absolutely.
economy. And
That's what they're
countries
talking
that,
about.
yeah, countries that lose their ability to manufacture the things they use inevitably decline. And the unfortunate thing is a lot of economists think that the exporting of manufacturing jobs to the third world is a good thing, and it replaces them with service jobs. But like you pointed out, not everybody can do these service jobs, and they don't pay as well as a lot of the manufacturing jobs. So the gap increases between the poor and the rich.
Mhm.
And we wind up with, we'll be like a South American country with 99% poor people and 1% rich people. So not good.
But if in our final story, this
We
is
should
all
all
going to
be-
cause
But
dementia.
before, one of the things that's good in the US is everything is required to post its country of origin, like all the food products and boxed cookies and all this stuff in the US have to say what country it comes from, so that consumers can make a choice about where they, what they buy. But in Canada, that's not the way at all, and it should be the way that we would be able to make those choices.
Well, I think in America, I'm afraid the way people make most of their product choices is by the price tag, not the country of origin label.
Well, if they buy it from Walmart, they're buying it from China, is what it amounts to.
Right.
I
Yeah.
just want to make the point that whenever we buy berries, we look for the fact that they come from Mexico.
That's good. Good work. We have the good berries.
Yes.
I think it only makes a slight difference. I'm a socialist, but I can't resist cheap prices.
Okay, it's
Okay, then Richard, on to our last story. How about keeping your brain active, delaying Alzheimer's? Is that what we can do?
well, I think that you're joining this hot science session every week is probably going to delay Alzheimer's disease for you by 5 years. So you should keep watching. What they have found is that keeping your brain active in old age then is even better than what they had thought before, and that it looks like it delays the onset of Alzheimer's by up to 5 years. And to do this, they did a study of a couple of thousand people with an average age of 80 who did not have dementia at the start of the study. And on a 5-point scale, they had them answer questions about 7 different activities. Things like, in the past year, how often did you read books? Or during the past year, how often did you play games like checkers or board games or cards or puzzles? And a score of 1 meant something you did once a year or less, and a score of 5 meant you did it almost every day. And what they found was people in the high cognitive activity area scored an average of 4.0 on this, compared to the average about 2.1 for those with the low cognitive activities. And then once they had that sorted out, they studied on average when these people were developing dementia. And they found that people with high levels, the highest level of activity, developed dementia at the age of 94. And the people with the lowest cognitive average on activity developed dementia at the age of 89. That's a 5-year difference. It's also interesting, they did a cross section of about 700 of these 80-year-olds who died during the study, and they were not able to find any association between how mentally active they were and markers for Alzheimer's disease or related disorders of the brain. So you could see a significant behavioral difference and a difference at the onset of Alzheimer's, but they couldn't see any difference in their brain, which to me says they don't know what is happening with Alzheimer's and the brain things that are behind it. But their research suggests that the link between cognitive activity and the age at which a person develops dementia is mainly driven by the activities you do later in life. Later in life, by the way, is the life stage that all of us today are in. And so whatever you do, continue to keep your brain active and stave off Alzheimer's as long as you can.
If we delay Alzheimer's long enough.
That's right. I hope to delay it after. I hope to only get Alzheimer's maybe 2 weeks after I die.
I was going to say something else will get you if you delay it long enough.
Right.
But correlation is not causation, and it may be that people who don't get Alzheimer's are the ones who are cognitively active. You know, it may not be the cognitive activity that's
Sure.
postponing Alzheimer's. It could be just the way the nature of cognitively active people.
Could be, however, still based on stuff like this, it makes me personally interested in continuing to keep my mind active.
And we all know cognitively active people who have come down with Alzheimer's.
Sure.
So,
But
and they think checkers is a cognitive activity. That's interesting.
is there anything more important than genetics, though? It seems to me that some people are genetically inclined to get Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia.
They still are finding that there is an enormous component of this that is behavioral. And I think they will find out that there are other details perhaps that are involved in things like microbiome that we just don't know about. But the stuff that I've been reading for the last several years says the key in most of these areas of decline that happens with age is there's an enormous behavioral component, and that more of the half of the individual variation is behavior, not genetics.
So keep those
I have
calming, Richard. Keep us mentally active.
Right, and I haven't been on your program for a few weeks, and I could feel my brain getting a little spongy.
That's
So
right.
it's better today. Better today.
Okay. Good to see you back.
So, well, thank you, Richard,
Okay.
and everyone, and everyone.
Well, thanks, Richard. We appreciated that, and good to see everyone here. I won't be around for the next 2 weeks, and then I'll be back in Ahihi. But we hope to see you all, and thanks very much for participating. Bye for now.
Thanks,
you,
Fred.
Richard.
Adios.
Good travels.
Okay. Keep your mind active.
Yeah.
See you.